John. How's it going today?
All right. It's going great, Nick. How about with you?
I'm good. I just hit record. I know it was one of those awkward silences after I hit record. I don't know what that is. We were having such a great conversation. Then all of a sudden, boom. It's like you saw me hit the button.
I did because we just dummy up, don't we?
Yeah, we do. It's amazing how that works. How you feeling today, John?
I feel awesome. If I were any better, I would be you.
Well, we were talking before, and you got to forgive me, our listener. Forgive me because I'm growing a beard right now. I do this at least once a year. I love a beard. I think it looks great on me. My wife and daughter absolutely hate it, but it's in that stage right now. And this is usually the stage where I shave it because it itches so bad. So you might hear me go once in a while as I'm scratching my face.
I've heard you do that without a beard, though.
That is very, very true. I do that all the time. I love scratching my face. It's one of my favorite pastimes.
Well, that's good. So do you grow them? And just for our beard loving audience, do you grow them? I mean, is it like a once a year thing, or is it a couple times a year, or how often do you actually do it?
Yeah, we just had a long break this year. So I had about 2 weeks where I didn't have to shave for work. So I decided to grow it out this time. But normally I usually grow my beard during November. It's the no shave November or Movember, depending on what you think. I think I look ridiculous with a mustache. So I go ahead and do the no shave November and just kind of see how far I can go in a month, how much my beard grows out. But now I've had 2 weeks, and 2 weeks is enough. I think I'm going to shave it here pretty soon, maybe. But
don't do it.
I was on a conference call yesterday, and we had the video on, and I was looking at some of my coworkers who have epic beards. So I'm torn because I really think that I could grow an epic beard and really compete with those coworkers of ours. But I don't know. If I can get past the itchy stage, maybe, but it drives me nuts.
Well, I think first you have to stop calling it the itchy stage, because I think that in itself minimizes the beard growing.
Well, I thought I had a case of crabs once, but I counted and there were only 11.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. You're making me ill now. I know the coworkers. I know, let's not call them that. I know the coworkers about whom you speak, and they do indeed have prodigious beards.
Prodigious. I love that word.
If you can grow them that fast or even close to that and that thick, dude, you're doing the world a disservice by not growing one.
I keep telling my wife that. Again, I don't get the love, literally and figuratively, that I would expect from such an epic beard.
Well, literally would be the problem.
Right.
Not for me. I don't care whether you get that or not, but, I understand.
Well, speaking of coworkers and the business that we are in, I think today you wanted to talk a little bit about leasing versus buying of vehicles. I think it might, not only is it something that we have a lot of experience in, you more than I think it's something that might actually benefit our listeners for once. Or at least our listeners.
Yes. I'm sure there's at least one person.
Right. The PoddiMouth podcast, the podcast about everything and nothing all at the same time.
And nothing at the same time. Yes. I guess what draws us to this leasing versus buying is content that we've had earlier and conversations that you and I have had in the past that, how can we go about finding what's best for everybody? And the answer is pretty simple, that there is no one right way for everybody. It's different depending upon how you're going to use your vehicle, how many miles you put on your vehicle, and so on. So that's the first caveat that I want to make sure to put out there before we say, if you're not leasing, you're wasting all your time. Or if you are leasing, you're an idiot because it never works. And it's just not true. It does work really well for some people. For example, I'm going to take a stab at this. Other than the one I own right now, the last probably 8 new vehicles I've purchased, and I'll say that in quotes, have been through leases, because it works really well for me in most situations. I say, with the exception of the one I have now, I do have a new vehicle now, or I bought it new. But the only reason I didn't lease it is because they had 0% financing. That's pretty good. That's an excellent rate if you're going to finance a vehicle.
Oh, absolutely.
0 is really good.
Absolutely. Well, let's take
go.
Which is fantastic. And I'll be honest, I have known for a very long time that leasing benefits, or the leasing benefits is probably a more accurate way to say that. I've known him, but I until recently had never actually leased a vehicle. I just leased one for my wife, and that was the first one that I had leased. And there's a reason behind that, and we can talk about that here in a few minutes. But let's take a step backwards and give us a little history about why leasing might have such a negative vibe about it. Why it has such a bad reputation right now? Because I know there were some issues in the 80s and 90s, right?
Yeah, and even before that, not even so much in the 90s. It had kind of reached a peak of I guess just being a problematic way to pay for the use of a vehicle. The way it used to be, and I'm talking about even the 80s and before, they were almost exclusively open-ended leases, which meant that whoever leased the vehicle to you would define the end value of the lease of the vehicle at the end of the lease. And the problem with that is you're kind of at their mercy, whether they think it's worth, $20,000 or $15,000. It was totally up to the lessee, the company that provided the lease. Ever since, as far as I can recall, the early 80s, leasing has been done exclusively on a closed-end basis. And what that means is the value at the end of the lease is guaranteed up front. It's called a residual value or a lease end value. And what that means is if I have a vehicle that I paid $30,000 for, or that was the value of the vehicle when I bought it, at the end of the lease, and they usually use a percentage, let's say it's 50%, they guarantee that vehicle, no matter what it's actually worth, will be worth $15,000 or half of the initial value. So that guarantee makes a lease a much safer option for a lot of people. And frankly, is that open-end piece of it that really caused a lot of consternation, where people said, I'm never going to lease because they tried to rip you off. And in reality, that's sometimes what happened.
Which is in many cases why the car business has such a bad reputation. Something that we have talked about previously in other episodes that we are working to change, and I think has been changing quite a bit in the auto industry, specifically when it comes to dealers and dealerships. So we've moved past that bad reputation that has come from poor practices in the past. And now we have basically two options to purchase a car. When you go into a store, you have the option to purchase, and that can be pay cash. It can be financing for up to, you can go up to 84, 90 months, something like that. You can go as far as the bank will allow you to go. But leasing is about the same, but there are two different. I'm completely boggling my words now, so let's back up a little bit. I'll cut this part out.
No, this is awesome.
I'm stumbling. I've had 2 cups of coffee. Going back to our coffee episode.
Yes, right.
So you have 3 ways basically to purchase a vehicle now. You have cash. You can buy it. You can pay it up front. If you have the money, go ahead and do it. You can finance for X amount of months, and then you can lease. We obviously know the difference between paying cash and buying and leasing lumped together. But can you explain to our listener the real difference between buying and leasing?
For sure. Buying is, and it kind of falls into 2 different layers. Buying is paying cash. Buying is also financing, because you're usually using an outside source that's not the dealership to pay for the use of the money, if you will. So again, let's use our $30,000 example. If I'm buying a vehicle that's $30,000, and this is the reason a lot of people don't lease, is they say, I want to own my vehicle. Well, all I can tell you is this: if you're on a 60-month loan and you miss the 59th payment, you're going to find out who really owns the vehicle. It's not you. The person or the entity that owns the vehicle is that which is loaning the money. They have first claim to that vehicle throughout the term of the loan. So that's why when you say things like, I want to own my vehicle, you're owning a depreciating asset, and that's not always the best financial decision. Without having an opportunity to sit here and write things out on a board and show people, it's just fair to say that you do not own the vehicle until you've paid it off. At that point, once you've paid it off, which is just made the payments as agreed to the lender, then you do own it. But at that point, sometimes you don't want to own it, because then you have problems with the vehicle that can arise. You have more maintenance that comes up. Tires have to be replaced, belts and hoses, and often there are other problems that arise, such as maybe you have transmission problems or whatever. Those are all things that you have to pay for when you own the vehicle, and typically they arise 4 years and after into the life of the vehicle. So when you lease a vehicle, typically the lease term is shorter. The average lease term probably falls somewhere around 36 months. And the reason that's the preferred term is because that's when the residual value, or the lease end value that's, remember, guaranteed now, is its highest. Because if you're going to lease for 60 months, the residual value starts to drop. And what that means is your payments then go up, because the payments on a lease are certainly based on rates that are prevalent, but also based heavily on what the residual or lease end value of that vehicle is. So you can imagine, if the 36-month lease end value is 50%, as I used in our example before, if the 48-month lease end value is only 20%, you're going to understand why the shorter term, in this case 36 months, is a better deal to get your payments lower. And again, I don't want to try and confuse the issue. It's something you should be able to talk to your dealer about. It's not to say that dealers don't make profit on leases, because they do. And often they have an opportunity to make more profit than they do on a finance contract, because they can adjust the purchase price of the vehicle, and it doesn't make as big a difference in the payments as it would if you're financing it. So without making it, and if I have already, forgive me, but without trying to make it sound too cut and dried, it really varies based on a lot of things, such as how long you want to own a vehicle. Most people are great with 36 months. They don't want to own it longer than that, because when you're out of warranty, which for many vehicles is about that 36-month rate or that time frame, your warranty is up. And that's the bumper to bumper warranty I'm talking about. The beauty of a lease is you're always under warranty. And that's exciting for a lot of people, because they don't have to worry about things that could go wrong, like the transmission, for example, or like even tires. And I've never had to pay for tires on a leased vehicle, because that's part of normal wear and tear. And as long as I stay under warranty, I usually don't have to. Same is true about anything that goes wrong with the vehicle. Remember, bumper to bumper coverage. That's a big piece of it. So,
well, and let's also add to that the two items that sometimes go undiscussed, I guess, even when you're in the store. When you go into a lease, that lease is managed meaning your mileage is set. It's capped. Now you can go over the mileage, you can go under the mileage, but the lease itself is a little bit more controlled. So the value of the vehicle is a little bit, it's guaranteed, as you said, because of the controls set into the lease. A number of dealerships, to protect that and protect the value, will also put a maintenance contract in. Of course, you'll pay for it, but they'll put a maintenance contract into that lease so that all of your maintenance is also taken care of while you have that vehicle. Is that not correct? That's one of the ways they control the cost?
Potentially, it's one way they can control the profit as well. But what I will say about that is those maintenance contracts are totally not required. So if you don't want a maintenance contract, you don't have to pay for one.
Absolutely.
There are some dealers who may lead you to believe differently, but that's when you run away from the dealer because there are other competitors that you can talk about. The mileage part, though, Nick, you're right on. The mileage part goes a couple of different directions. If you know about how many miles you drive, and the good way to tell is how many did you drive on your last vehicle. If you owned it for 3 years and it has 45,000 miles, pretty easy to do the math. You put on 15,000 miles a year. Now, if something changes and you think, well, my job changed, or I'm going to be traveling more outside of, my local area, so I'll be renting cars, then maybe you can say, well, I could get by with 12,000 miles a year. And you may be right. Some people can even go as low as 10,000 miles a year. And that will often lower your payment. So it's kind of a nice way to look at it. But if you drive the 15, or even if you drive 20,000 miles a year, it doesn't mean you can't lease. It just means your monthly payment is going to be typically higher because you're putting on those extra miles. You want to roll it into your payment usually. What that means is if I have a good sense that I'm going to drive 20,000 miles a year, it's better to pay for it up front in your monthly payments than it is to pay for it at the end. So if you're surprised, if you only assumed 45,000 miles over the course of a 3-year lease, and in reality, you put on 60,000 miles, that additional 15,000 miles, you're going to have to pay for at a higher rate than had you done it up front. So that scares some people. And they say, well, it seems like they're changing. They don't change it. It's all written into the contract. So you'll be able to see it from the day you drive away. But the concern becomes if they charge, instead of 10 cents a mile, maybe they charge 15 or 20 cents a mile if you do not roll it into the payment right up front. So it's going to cost you more, and that money will be due at the termination of the lease. So it gets a little scary for some people. It doesn't have to be, though. If you think you're going to be – go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, and we also – to make it less scary, you have the opportunity at that point, if you have to roll some we call negative equity, I guess, into or pay for it at the end of the lease is a better way of explaining it. You can roll that into the next lease as well, or into the next purchase.
You can.
Correct?
You can. And that's any negative equity. So in the case of maybe you have some damage on the vehicle, you're required to pay for damage, just like if it were your own vehicle. So a lease is very much like owning the vehicle. Because
you're just paying for what you use.
You pay for what you use in terms of mileage. You also pay for what you use in terms of damage on the vehicle. So
exactly.
But it's just that it has to be repaired. So it's not that they can throw any random number at you if you have some damage on the vehicle. Actually, a little bit of damage, much like you might have with a rental car. If you rented it, something smaller than a fingertip usually is what they allow for normal wear and tear on a lease. It's usually about what they allow on a rental as well. So you kind of get the sense that there are some options, even if you do have that. But as Nick said, let's say you have $500 worth of damage on the vehicle that has not been repaired. You can roll that $500 into your next lease or purchase. And so it makes it, some people think that is kind of a scam. It's really not. It's no different than trading in a vehicle that has damage on it, because it's worth less if it has high miles or if it has damage on it, just like a lease would be. So if you have higher mileage, go ahead.
Let's talk about that a little bit too, because going back to the statement I made earlier about leasing for the very first time, I leased my wife a brand new vehicle. I used my vehicle to trade in. And one of the reasons I chose to do it, and one of the reasons I chose to do a lease, one, the lease deal was exceptional. I actually had a lot of negative equity in my vehicle, and the vehicle that I chose, if I would have known when I bought it how badly I would have taken a bath on it, I probably wouldn't have purchased it, because, all these different vehicles will have different values when you trade them in based on the market. And the market value for this particular vehicle is horrible. And I probably would not be able to get out from under this vehicle until the end of my loan, which is ridiculous. And it was a 72-month loan. So I was in bad shape. And one of the reasons, or one of the ways to get out of from underneath of that vehicle, was to go into a lease. It was to roll that negative equity into a lease. And because the deal was so good, my payment didn't change. And now my wife has a brand new vehicle for 3 years that she absolutely loves, under warranty, that she absolutely loves, for the same payment. And now I don't have to worry about that negative equity at the end of the lease term. So it is a way for people to get out from bad loans.
Yeah, it's a really good way. And you provided a really good example of it, Nick, that when the beautiful part about it is, as he said, your payments really stayed pretty much the same as they did in your purchase, which was prior to your lease experience. And the reason for that is lease payments are almost always lower on the same exact vehicle than purchase payments. Almost always the payments are lower. And that's one of the big attractions, and that you can trade every 3 years and that you're always under warranty. So there are some real benefits to that. If you are in a negative equity position, as Nick mentioned he was, and I have been in the past as well, where your vehicle that you're trading is worth less than it should be, or you're in a negative equity position where you owe more than it's worth. In that case, it's great to be into a lease, because you can roll. Let's say it's $500 that you owe on a vehicle that's worth $500 less. Then suddenly you can roll that back in, and your payments don't go up dramatically as they might on a purchase. And you don't have to come up with the cash either. That's the other benefit of it. Rather than, saying, oh, well, here's my $500, I'm in negative equity. You don't have to do that with the lease. You can just roll that in as it's called a change to the capitalized cost. And you can that can either work in your favor monetarily, or it can cover up negative equity. So, for example, on one of my leases, I was in a position where the car was worth more than I owed by about $1,000. So when I traded the vehicle in on a lease, it worked as what we call a capitalized cost reduction. And all that does, it's like a down payment on a purchase. So it lowered my payments even more, because essentially I was putting down $1,000 in equity in my trade toward the new lease. So the payment was really, really low, and it was a great way to go to get into the next vehicle. So some real opportunities for people that they don't always have when they're in a purchase, or even just paying cash. And maybe we should talk about that as well, Nick, about paying cash for a vehicle versus leasing. Do you have any prior knowledge about that, or have you ever done that?
Yes, I have. But before we get into that, I want to talk about, before we leave leasing, I want to talk about those people out there that are naysayers for the lease. Yeah. I hate to call him out, but there is one gentleman, and I'll think about using his name here, but probably be able to figure it out. There's a financial guru, fantastic guy. I love what he talks about. I love how he's helped so many people. Sure. I'm not trying to negate anything that he he talks about in the teaching that he does, or the consulting that he does. But one thing that he does talk about is the bad side of leasing, the downside, and why you shouldn't lease. He calls it fleecing. What would you say? And he does not have industry background. He doesn't have the industry background we have in the automotive business.
Sure.
So he doesn't. I don't think, from a financial standpoint, I do believe he is of that genius level. I think he's again fantastic when it comes to that. But
sure.
For him to go out and talk about lease being a negative way to purchase a vehicle, or not a very good way to purchase a vehicle, what would you say to someone like that, knowing what we just talked about, talking about the negative equity, trying to get out from under a vehicle, and then also that part about paying for a vehicle every month that you don't necessarily have to take care of. And the reason I bring it up, and the reason sure. I'm actually a little bit passionate about this point, is because I do think there's a lot of value in leasing to help people financially. I think it's a way out of bad financial situations in many cases. And I also think that there are a number of people out there that should not be behind the wheel of a car, a used car that they've paid cash for, that has 100,000 miles on it, and that's breaking down constantly. Because for me, that doesn't make financial sense either. You're paying right. for maintenance, and you're probably paying more for maintenance than you should. So how is that actually saving you money?
Okay, so let's talk about that, because they are terrific questions. And first, let me just say, leasing's not for everybody. And the last thing I would tell you is, hey, no matter what, you should be leasing. However, neither is purchasing. As you said, this particular guru, and I think I know who you're talking about, and it doesn't matter because there are several out there, and there are naysayers to leasing, of course, sometimes just because of the, of how it turns them into an expert. But for other reasons, they really think it is the right thing without the knowledge of or comprehension of what it means. So, with that, let's just say, if you think there's only one way to engage in a vehicle transaction, you're wrong. So if you think, and this guy in particular might think, that it's best to buy what you can afford and use it to get a pre-owned vehicle with high mileage on it, I agree with you, Nick. I don't think that's always the right thing to do. Now, if you're lucky and you buy that 100,000 mile or 150,000 mile vehicle, and you don't have a major breakdown, then that's probably the best way to go. The problem is we're talking about machinery here, and no one, not financial gurus or anyone, myself included, can guarantee you that a vehicle with 100,000 miles on it isn't going to break down. Nobody can guarantee that. So it's kind of a crapshoot, and I don't say that lightly. I'm willing to take, for example, for me, I'm willing to take the risk that I'm spending too much money on a lease in an effort to stay under the full new vehicle warranty. So I'm willing to do that. I travel quite a bit, and when I'm out of town, I know my wife is always going to have roadside assistance or some sort of comfort level that I'll have based on the vehicle that she's driving being under full warranty. So that's worth it to me. Now, that might not be for everybody. And this guru and others might say, well, you're an idiot because here's what you're missing out on. What if it doesn't break down? Okay, what if it doesn't? But the other question, and the one I would retort with, is what if it does? Most people can't afford an $1,800 transmission job if they bought a 100,000 mile pre-owned vehicle. If you have funded yourself for something like that, then you're better than I am. But I don't need an $1,800 surprise. I also don't need an engine to go, which is more like a $3,400 surprise. And those are big, I'll admit it. I don't really want to pay for tires, which is a $500 surprise or maybe a little more. So the point is, it's not for everybody. But remember, when we're talking about leasing, and at least primarily here, we're talking about new vehicles. You can lease used. It just doesn't, it's not as big a benefit. The payments aren't as low. They're not changed as much on pre-owned as they are on new. So for me, the only vehicles I've ever leased are new vehicles. And so I'm not saying that's the only way you can go. Sometimes with pre-owned, depending upon the vehicle and how many miles you drive and things like that, sometimes that's feasible. My experience, though, is primarily for myself with new vehicles. So if a new vehicle is not something you want, okay, that's fine. Then look at pre-owned. Look at a certified pre-owned if you want. I take the advice of the gurus if you want to, but understand that if it's out of warranty, you're going to be on the hook for paying for any maintenance or any repairs that have to be done. Whereas if I'm in a lease and my payment is similar, I'm not going to be on the hook for that. So again, we're talking about new primarily here as opposed to pre-owned. If your other choice is paying cash for a vehicle, and it kind of rolls into this, Nick, so I'm just going to touch on this real quickly. Paying cash, the choice is always, what can I do with my cash, or what can my cash do for me, rather than being invested in a vehicle. And vehicles, as I mentioned, are always depreciating assets. Always. They never increase in value. Right. I mean, if you want to look for bad investments, it's tough to find one worse than an automobile. And I understand that. And
Absolutely.
I say that fully. Go ahead.
No, and I agree with you 100%. And this is where I have heard some of these gurus we've talked about kind of talk themselves into a corner, because a number of them now, a lot of them will say you should pay cash for your vehicle. You should save up and pay cash for your vehicle. But you make an excellent point. Every vehicle, there's not one vehicle out there, unless you're buying a 1982 Ferrari and you're buying it to sit in your garage and oogle at. Right. There are very few vehicles out there that are not depreciating every minute. Every minute it sits in your driveway, every minute that's on the road, it's depreciating.
The only
every mile you put on it depreciates.
The only things that depreciate more that I've found are anything having to do with computers or telephones, cell phones. Those are the only things that depreciate faster. And so with that knowledge, and I'll let you finish your point. With that knowledge, it's not always correct for everybody, because not everybody is in the identical situation. Go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. It changes. We're talking broad here. Everything that we're talking about is very broad. And there are a lot of different situations that you can find yourself in. And there is no really a real right answer that can go across the board for everybody. But to finish my point, you don't want to pay. And you hear these gurus say, don't pay cash for a depreciating asset. Let that, either don't buy it or figure out a way to protect yourself from the depreciation. And in many cases, leasing or using a finance term, we're paying the bank. We are paying the bank with interest rates, or the dealership, because the dealership sometimes, or in many cases, gets part of that. You are paying them to borrow money, but at the same time, you're never really, if you do it right, you're never really going to use all of that money, which again is a benefit to leasing, because you see all that information right up front. You're only paying for the amount of the car you're using. But even with on the finance side of things, you're only really paying for what you use, even though the depreciation is going to go faster, and you could find yourself into a lot of trouble if you're not in a vehicle that holds its value. In my brief history with vehicles, I have found that the vehicles that I have owned that have retained the value the best, incredibly actually, have been my Jeep Wranglers. Both Jeep Wranglers, when I sold them, I profited, and I profited quite a bit on those vehicles. So, and when I say profit, I didn't actually come out ahead. I just did very, very well when I traded them in, based on the amount of use that I gave them and the damage that they had.
They had damage?
Of course they did. They're Jeeps. What do you expect?
That's awesome. You just say it very matter of fact. I will say that yeah, depending upon how many miles were on it and how much damage I did to it. I've never said that about a Cadillac that I've owned.
Yeah, but there's definitely a difference between someone who owns a Cadillac and someone who owns a Jeep. Jeep owners will understand. Once you have a Jeep, it's a Jeep thing.
It's a Jeep thing.
statement is so very true. You wouldn't. It's a Jeep thing. You wouldn't understand.
I would understand because it's also it used to be a Hummer thing, if you remember them.
A Hummer thing. Oh yeah. Absolutely. I will say though, before I got my first Jeep, I actually had a Geo Prism. I don't know if anyone remembers the Geo Prisms. They became Chevy Prism after that. But the Geo Prism, I actually took that off road more than I took my original Jeep. On purpose, absolutely.
You didn't just accidentally end up off road, because we used to call them. We used to call them Geo Prison because we were in like prison because we owned one. I'm sorry. Well, I by not being able to stand in front of a whiteboard and make all the detailed interactions and showing all the minutia about what leases versus purchasing or paying cash or whatever. Hopefully our discussion has at least opened some people's eyes, Nick, about, maybe they should take a look at it if they hadn't in the past. But I've had people that came in to the dealership where I used to work and they'd say, hey, no matter what, I'm not going to lease. And I'd say, you know what? A lot of my customers have said the same thing. In fact, a lot of my customers who end up leasing from me have said the same thing. So all I'm going to ask you is 10 minutes. If you're interested at the end of the 10 minutes or even 5 minutes, then great. If you're not, that's okay too. Because I don't care how you pay for the vehicle. You're just paying for the use of it. And you can either do that with a lease or with a purchase or financing it or paying cash. Honestly, I don't care how you decide to do it. And really, that's true for most people.
I think so. And I think if you take one thing away from this particular episode of our podcast is ask. All we're asking for you to do is ask your dealer. And I'll be honest, some dealers do it better than others, and some can explain it better than others. So if you're not in a place that the dealer leases a lot, you probably want to go somewhere where they do, and ask the question and figure out what's better for you. I think you made that statement, and it's a perfect statement to make. It's not for everybody. Leasing is good for some people. Buying is good. Paying cash might be good for some people, but know your options, ask questions, and make sure you're making the right decision based on your situation. Yeah.
If you're not getting what you feel to be accurate information from your dealer, and I'm not just talking about leasing now, I'm talking about anything, then leave. The biggest thing you have working in your favor is your ability to leave. And a lot of people lose sight of that. They say, oh, the dealer talked me into X, Y, or Z. And while that may be true, you had to buy what he or she was selling. So don't get talked into something. Your ultimate ability is to leave if you're not getting the treatment you are looking for. So do it. You don't have to buy anything today. You don't have to lease anything today. There is no big rush that should make you inclined to make a decision you're not ready to make.
Well said. I think that's a perfect statement to end on. And I don't think I have any other questions. Do you have any other statements, John?
I'm loaded with statements. This has been kind of a serious PoddiMouths podcast.
I was trying.
Really serious.
Yeah, well, and that's where that pause came in. I was trying to make it funny, and I can't figure out a way to make it funny. I guess leasing is just not funny, guys.
It's not funny. We've tried to make it funny, but then people get pissed off and they go, hey, I didn't come on for entertainment. I came on for leasing. Is it a good thing or isn't it? So, yeah, this is maybe one of those instances where it's less funny than others. There's not as much material, but if you walk away with one thing or one idea that you had about leasing or one question to ask, then it's worth your time. And hey, we want to give that stuff every once in a while to be mixed in with our raucous humor that normally is throughout the PoddiMouths podcast.
Absolutely. And quite honestly, if anyone has any questions, we are more than willing to answer. Reach out to us on our social media networks, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram even. If you want to ask us questions, you can also go to our website. There's a contact form on there. Feel free to write us a note and see if we can answer any of those questions. We do have quite a bit of experience in this area. Obviously, we've been working in it, John, much longer than I have, but I have.
Because I'm older.
but you're much better looking. John and I have a lot of experience and oh yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know if you, it's probably not in your, lineup yet, but on Netflix right now, they have the new season of, a series of unfortunate events. The story from Lemony Snicket. My daughter's watching it as we speak right downstairs as she's still on break. There are two characters on there. There's the bald man with the beard and the lady with hair and no beard. Or I'm getting those names wrong, but it's really funny because the guy has this magnificent mega beard and no hair, which is about what I am right now. And someday you'll be the lady with the hair and no beard, John.
Oh, I'm not sure how I'll be a lady, but thank you for the offer.
Luck be a lady tonight. Anyway, feel free to ask us questions on all of our social media. Reach out to us. We're happy to answer. If we don't have the answer for some reason, we have access to a lot of people that do. And you know, we would love to hear from you. So even if you just want to reach out and say hi, please do. Again, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can donate if you want to hear some more really awesome information about leasing or about nothing at all. Support us on Patreon. We have an account there too. Anything else you want to say, John?
I want to say if anybody supports us on Patreon, we love you.
Absolutely. Big love.
We lust after all of our listeners, but we love you if you go to Patreon. Yes.
A lot of lust, a lot of love. Story of my life.
Mine too.
All right, John, take it easy.
You too, brother. Thanks everybody for tuning in.